Hi, everybody. So welcome to the first lesson, my first writer lesson that I'm going to be showing in the new series I have going here. Mentioned before that I'm going to start basically doing a weekly writing lesson series where I'm just going to basically once a month take a topic and go over that topic over the course of 4 or 5 lessons throughout the month. That way I can kind of dive a little bit deeper into these different ideas and hopefully, give you a bit more content and a bit more information than perhaps you might get if you were just, looking to maybe learn like surface level things like just improve dialogue or improve sentence structure, things like that. My goal with the series is to go a little bit deeper on different aspects and different topics, and honestly different systems and habits of writing as well. So for the month of August, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going over less direct writing focused and more of a summary of both the philosophy that I have towards writing, as well as some ideas on different writing programs that you can use, specifically different ways to improve your writing. And I'm also going to put in also the step-by-step process I used that took me from basically no draft at all, so like no draft for my novel, and got my novel all the way to a second round review for the publisher that's currently looking at it right now. So hopefully throughout this whole process you'll be able to take away some just different ideas and habits you might be able to apply for yourself. But for this week and next week, I'm actually going to be going over the 5 core ideas, or I guess 5, just basically 5 tenets of my writing philosophy. The reason why is that I'll for the past 7 months I've talked about the different these sort of different ideas regarding writing and habit and implementation and all that stuff. But it's pretty scattered. It's pretty scattered throughout my channel. It's not really something that if someone was to just kind of peruse through, you'd be able to find very easily. So I want to condense it all into basically 2 videos going over just the 5 core ideas I've tried to share. Hopefully you can take this away and kind of implement it. So these ideas are just my philosophy about the writing process itself. All right. So this week's gonna be the first 2 ideas. So let's begin. My first core idea, or first core tenet I tend to advocate for is writing almost every day. Obviously this channel is called Write Every Day. If I was not advocating for that first, right, that'd be kind of that'd be a bit, I wouldn't say hypocritical basically, but it's like why do you follow this if you don't advocate for it, right? So I do advocate for writing just about every day as a general rule. I know that most people have busy lives. I do myself, but I know there are people that probably have more busy lives than I do, and I understand that things come up and life happens, and writing every day is not something that most people are reasonably can pull off, right? It would require, I think, a good stretch of commitment that perhaps I don't. It would require probably a bit of a commitment, basically that would be very, very neurotic for some people, and I would hate for someone to basically be driving themselves crazy to try to do this. So writing almost every day, ideally, every day, and then if something comes up, take a day off. Or writing perhaps like 6 days out of 7, right? So you write Monday to Saturday, you take Sunday off for a break, or Monday to Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. But writing almost every day is really the core thing I've tried to impress upon everyone, because consistency just equals improvement. The more you do it, the better you get at it. But the other main reason is if you take a day off, it becomes way harder to write later. How many times have you, I went through this a million times myself, how many times have you written a section and it's been 1,000, 2,000 words, and it was great and you felt on fire and you felt so good that you got that, that dopamine, endorphin, rush that you got from that. And the next day you were feeling so good that you took the day off. You're like, I'll take the day off and I'll write tomorrow, right? So, I wrote Monday, I'll take Tuesday off. It's been, I earned it. All of a sudden Wednesday comes, it's hard to get back to the keyboard. Thursday, Friday, you're eventually a whole week's gone by and you haven't or you haven't written. Happened to me so many times before I started making this whole everyday thing. So Writing consistently avoids that. The other thing too is it keeps you engaged with your projects. I didn't put this up here basically, but it keeps you engaged. You're constantly thinking about your projects. You're constantly, playing around with the idea in your head. You're not just writing the idea and then having to come back and then having to kind of figure out, what's going on here, or where did I leave off? And as a final reason, a final point is when you take a day off, usually that first day back, or the first 2 days or 3 days back, you're kind of just making up for the days you missed, right? Your writing is not really, you notice your writing hasn't gotten any better. You're writing the day after a day off. If that first day back, it's not usually strong. You can keep much longer consistent writing, consistent quality of your writing by just writing every day as opposed to taking those days off. We tend to trick ourselves into thinking, a day off, right? It's good for recovery. You think maybe in your mind that it's like weightlifting, right? Where you take a day off so your muscles can grow. You think, I take a day off, let my brain refresh, let it kind of wash things out, and then I'll come back. It doesn't usually work that way, though, when it comes to, at least not for me. Like, it doesn't usually work that way when it comes to the process of being creative. The time you take away, maybe there's some ideas you can play with if you go for like a hike or if you go for like a bike ride and you kind of play around with the ideas instead of writing. Something might come to you, especially if you have maybe some sort of writer's block. But generally, you don't come away from something like that better. Usually, when you take time off and you come back, you're usually making up for that time you missed rather than coming back stronger and ready to go to that next level. So that is my main kind of core tenet for the first idea. Second idea is having a very strong first draft. Okay, I've talked about this a lot, but now it's finally on the board here, right? I advocate for drafting very, very slow. I'm not one of those people that talks about writing the really crappy first draft so you can get it done and then you can go back and you can just revise it endlessly and get it better. I tend to think that the quality of your first draft informs the rest of your story. I've mentioned before that when you are a writer, you're making an authorial choice. You are making choices and decisions about your story as you write. This is why when you're in, like high school English class and your professor says, "Have you noticed how the author used the description of the wallpaper?" He said that the wallpaper is yellow or something, and he's like, that author is trying to use the metaphor of the wallpaper being yellow to show melancholy of his character, just as a symbol for the melancholy that he's feeling and his depression. And so you hear something like that, and you go, maybe the author was just wanted a yellow wall, right? The author made an authorial choice. They made a decision, a very deliberate decision on what to do with that. And so you as the author need to start thinking the same way. You need to start thinking that what you put down on the page carries more weight than it does. A word is not just a word, it is an idea you're trying to convey, and you need to be conscious about what you're doing with that. And what happens is when you write these really fast drafts, when you write these really terrible drafts, and you say, it's crap. And yes, all first drafts are crap. I mean, unless you are the really gifted 1 in a million, your first draft's going to be crap regardless. But there are degrees of that. And when you write really fast drafts that are terrible, what happens is that you're surrendering your authorial choice. You're putting down words without thought. You'll describe the wallpaper of a room as blue without it meaning nothing. And sometimes, not everything has to have meanings. This is just an example. But the more you consciously are aware of what you want that wallpaper to look like, the stronger your prose is going to be. And it's not just, yes, obviously symbolism matters a lot. But it's not just that. Every word you put down affects the rest of your story. I've mentioned before about how you shape your story with every single sentence that you write. It's like laying tile. I've used that analogy before. Whenever you put down tile, right? If you want to do a backsplash in your bathroom, that very first tile is the one that matters. That first tile needs to be aligned perfectly. If it's a little bit off center, the whole thing goes. It's the same thing with your writing. like that very first word, that first sentence is going to shape the rest of that paragraph. Paragraph will shape the rest of your chapter, and then basically the chapter obviously will influence the rest of your book. Even if the content, even if, like the structural plot of your story is the same as what you want to say, when it comes to prose and how you say it, you've already structured that out. You've already structured the way your story is going to be told with that very first word. Like with that very first sentence, you've already told how the story basically is going to take shape. Because before a single word goes on the page, you can structure a story and tell it any million different ways, right? When you put down a word and you've shaped it. And when you write really fast drafts that very fast first drafts and very quick ones, and you don't think about what you're doing, you're putting down a lot of stuff. You're basically shaping a story in a way that you haven't really thought about. Yes, it can come out fine. It can come out passable. But that story is going to retain that same shape. And so when you go to your second and your third draft, you're revising based upon the framework that you have in your head already. That story is going to be told that same way in your head. Unless you decide to throw the whole entire chapter, and then obviously one chapter informs the other. So if you throw first chapter one out, you probably have to throw out the rest of it if you want to reshape the whole thing. So if you're going to throw the whole chapter out and revise it, fine. But even then, you've already probably solidified in your mind how the story's going to be told. You've already created that picture in your head. And so what I talk about a lot is being very conscious about what you put down the first time, being very aware about constructing things in your head. Make the sentences in your head first, then put it on the page. Make up the word, make up the paragraphs, in a sense, in your mind, and then put it down. And put it down once your sentences and once your paragraphs are doing multiple things. If your sentences and your words are only saying what it says right there, there's no subtext, nothing beneath it. If your chapters aren't trying to reveal things as well beyond just what's on the surface, that's obviously that's a problem too. It's its own problem. But you're more likely to do that when you fast draft, when you don't care about the first draft, because you can revise and get things, grammatically correct, or an even sentence level. You can get things, on an okay sentence level, but it's not going to necessarily say what you want it to say if that first draft is not strong. All right. And so I'm going to give a quick example of what I am talking about when I discuss having that strong first draft. Okay. So just an example, right? It was a dark and stormy night. Okay. Someone just wrote that down. Now, when they wrote that down, say you put this down, on your word processor, right? You determine that it's going to be a third person tale, right? Obviously. And you're opening with the weather. So you're opening with a sense of the weather. You've made the conscious choice as an author to describe the weather first. And this is obviously a means of setting the mood, right? So you're trying to basically create this sort of ominous tone by describing the weather first. That was a very deliberate act. Okay? Now the author is trying to create an atmosphere. So I, as the reader, will get the sense that this story is going to be some sort of mystery, some sort of darker tale, just based upon this opening, right? Just based upon this very first, part of your first sentence. And yes, obviously it's a very cliched sort of first sentence, right? All that stuff is used kind of as an example often. But the point I'm trying to make is that if you fast draft, you're probably not putting that thought into your work. You're probably not putting that level of consciousness into what you're writing, okay? Now, I'm going to give a counterpoint to that, right? So, it was a dark and stormy night. Let's say I revise it just a bit. Let's say I want to tell it in a different way. From the third floor window, I looked out as the evening clouds rolled in from the sea. All right. Again, not a great sentence. I mean, even the clouds rolling in from the sea, right? Clouds don't actually roll in from the sea. It's a bit already. I don't like that sentence, right? Just something I came up with. But we can gauge that's a first-person tale. So right away, if you decide to go with this over the other option, you're telling a first-person story now. And with that, it's a reflective tale. The narrator basically is always someone that's very reflective, someone's very introspective. You've already created a certain characteristic of that character that's going to carry the rest of the story. We're going to look for, or me as the reader is going to look for in terms of consistency for the rest of the story. Then we have the mood, right? It's more somber. The mood is far more somber and less scary than it was, say, in the very, other example there, right? Where it's the dark and stormy night. Now it's the evening clouds rolled in. It's a bit more somber. But you're getting the sense maybe there's something a little bit off, right? Because the clouds foreshadow danger. So you're using the clouds now as a symbolism for danger that's going to be coming in. Again, a very conscious choice, okay? And so I hope that this kind of makes sense in terms of what I'm trying to get across here when it comes to writing these strong first drafts. On your second drafts, you're probably not thinking of doing this. By the time you get to your second and third drafts, you're not thinking of revising your sentences so they say these deep, meaningful things, right? You're probably more inclined to be a bit lazy in terms of just wanting to make these changes so your sentences sound a little bit better, so they're a bit more clear, and so structurally they read better as you read them. You're not thinking so much in the later drafts about, oh, I want to create this atmosphere, right? And if you are, you're creating a whole lot of work for yourself as well if you decide to do this later. So I hope you understand that the first draft is going to influence the whole thing. It's very, very rare that you would write a bad first draft and throw it out or revise it completely and retell the story completely. I do know one author who does that, and they said it was convenient, or it was better after, the second one they said that went a lot better, but they're a very experienced author, and starting over again at zero, it's just not something I necessarily imagine most people are willing to do. If that is you, then perhaps this may work. But even then, even when you're writing that second draft, even that second draft's a complete overhaul and it's like a new first draft, you still need to make that one strong. If that second draft is, again, you're just using, weaker words, right? If you're using, filler sentences and supportive sentences and using sentences basically that just kind of are there to just move a pace along without actually having the sentences try to stick out, as an example, it's going to be weak. Your story is going to be weaker as a whole. So what I'm encouraging you is to make your first draft strong, to take the idea of the crappy first draft and the fast draft and throw that out completely. If your first draft takes you a year to get done, 2 years, that's stronger than if it took you, 2 years to write 3 different drafts of the same story, because that first one is a solid foundation. And again, I wanted to kind of avoid using the term foundation throughout this whole thing, but that's really what it is. It is a foundation for the rest of your story, and you cannot basically build up from that without having that first. You need to have the strong first draft first, at least in my opinion. So that is it for part 1. What I'm going to do now is next week I'll put up part 2, where I have my other 3 ideas, or my other 3 core concepts for authors as far as the writing process goes. If you have any questions on this, anything you want to go over, anything you'd like me to cover or expand upon with some of these ideas, I know this first drafting some people might still be, kind of arguing in their heads about this. So anything you want to expand upon or go over, leave it in the comments, and I'm more than happy to discuss that with you. But until next week, I'm signing off.